Welcome to the Millionaire Next Door Podcast with Robert Curtis, CFP, accredited investment fiduciary from Signature Estate and Investment Advisors. In this podcast, we help successful wealth accumulators like you looking to transition to a work-optional lifestyle by helping you build strategies for growing and maintaining your wealth. Robert draws from years of experience and fiduciary responsibility and interviews guest experts to help you build reliable strategies to grow and maintain your wealth. Now, on to the show.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Millionaire Next Door Podcast. We're so pleased again you're joining us. Today we have a terrific guest. I think this will be really, really interesting. Brendan Ahern, he's the Chief Information Officer at KraneShares. I've heard Brendan speak in the past, and we've gotten to know each other over the last few weeks. He's got some fascinating thoughts globally with China and whatnot. So he's going to cover some of that, and I think you'll find this really, really interesting. Brendan Ahern, welcome. How are you?
Thank you for the opportunity, Robert. It's great to reconnect.
Yeah, 100%. So, you dive so deep into that from an investment lens and whatnot, but why don't you just go for it? Tell us a little bit about what's going on, what should we be thinking about, and thoughts on your mind, and go for it. Yeah. Really,
our firm has been really focused on China and emerging markets, but also some global trends that we see taking place. My background has always been more on the indexing, the passive side of investing for the last, call it 25 years. So I kind of am different than some investors where I kind of look at the world through this indexing lens as opposed to traditional fundamental or quantitative. But yeah, I think there's a lot of really interesting trends that we see playing out in really not just technology, but the AI trend, and really the next step of that. I really do believe will be the physical world, our world, where AI. Embodied intelligence is kind of the term people use about the humanoid robotics. And there's a lot of emphasis on AI in terms of data centers, but certainly our travels to Asia, I think, maybe in Asia, they're maybe just a step or two ahead of us in some of the adoption. So it's something you don't really see or feel here on a daily basis, but in our travels and my travels to Asia, it is something that you actually see it. It's actually happening as we speak, and it'll be coming here to the U.S. very soon.
Wow. Couple thoughts, questions. Just I'd love to hear what that actually looks like. You actually see it. Like, I'll see these little robots delivering food around cities. Okay, but just on a side thought, I'd heard some time ago, Japan, for example, has this really aging population.
Yep.
And so they were sort of forced into a lot of that stuff, robotics, because they didn't have the people, and developed a lot of technology earlier than we might have, just out of demographic necessity. But tell us what you actually see when you go there and what that actually means. And that maybe they're further along the path than we are, but I'd love to hear about it.
Yeah, I think, if you travel to Japan, at the two major Tokyo airports, Haneda and Narita, they actually have these humanless wheelchairs that just drive themselves around. And you can hop in and say, take me to gate 32, and it just zips you off. And I know a lot of us, you're used to getting off an airplane and there's a line of people with wheelchairs. I haven't seen it. But now they're actually testing using humanoid robotics as baggage handlers at the two Japanese airports. About a year ago, we had dinner in Hong Kong with Alibaba, and in the restaurant, they have these little like R2D dumb waiters, where they just drive around, and the waiter would just put your plate right into this little R2D2 dumb waiter, and it would zip off into the kitchen. I've not done it, but our founder ordered room service in China, and there was a knock at the door, and he opened the door and he looked around. There's no one there, and then he looked down, and there was like a little wheeled drone with his meal. So to your point, there's a bit of a demographic issue in many highly urbanized cities, countries. If it's Japan, Korea, China, certainly in Europe, it's going to come, and then I think there's also, there's jobs that are really dangerous. Traveling to Latin America, we're sending people down into, miles down into the into the earth to get copper or lithium. And I think you can replace that. There's no reason to risk someone's life if you can send a humanoid robot. And the real key here is the AI that the that the robots, humanoid robots, are almost like remote controlled cars. But when you enable it with AI, it takes kind of a kid's toy and turns it into an economically viable tool. And that's what the AI, I think it's the nitrous oxide, so to speak,
Mm,
on this trend.
that's amazing. Yeah, I was going to ask you to go a little deeper on enable it with AI, and I get the nitrous oxide, right? It pumps this super highly volatile fuel right into the you know the cylinders or whatnot. Keep going. This is so fascinating that, and you have so many perspectives, and maybe even as it relates to the rest of the world. I'm guessing you're thinking that that means a lot of that stuff's ultimately coming here. But I loved your example of going down to the earth and mining and not risking someone's life. And so continue on, please. It's
Yeah, I think
fascinating.
I mean, stepping back, I mean, some of sell side research that you have, Bank of America Global Research, they put the numbers at, last year they thought there was probably 90,000 or 20,000 humanoid robots, but that they think by 2030 that goes up to 1.2 million, 10 million by 2035, actually 3 billion by 2060. Morgan Stanley Global Research, um, they put it by 2036, 24 million humanoids. That jumps to 137 million by 2040, 430 by 2044. How they're coming up with this is actually looking at electric vehicle adoption, hybrid vehicle adoption. That as manufacturers scale, that what we've seen in terms of hybrid and electric vehicle production, they're kind of applying that S curve adoption rate to this humanoid robots, and that's why they're very, very bullish. And yeah, I think you're seeing automotive makers. I mean, I know Tesla gets a lot of publicity for Optimus. Hyundai actually owns Boston Dynamics, so there's a lot of talk about, can you take a assembly line that's historically made cars? It's very similar to making robots, and so I think Hyundai has a big plant down in Georgia. Obviously, Tesla's talked about their Fremont factory migrating. But in China, we're actually seeing several players are actually at scale today. The largest is actually a private company called Unitree that's filed to go public in China. So this is in mainland China. But Unitree, they made 5,500 humanoids in 2025. Over the last 12 months, we've actually seen their output increase by about 50%, where they're up to about 458 robots that they're making on a monthly basis. So a lot of what I think when, if it's from 60 Minutes or a lot of news, it's kind of in the US, it's on the whiteboard. It's what we're talking about. It's actually happening. And, we actually have bought a Unitree robot. And actually, yeah, Robert, we'd love to kind of bring it to your office and show you in person, because seeing is believing. But yeah, certainly you have a number of players from China on the manufacturing now. Now, the key is that on the tech, it's really dominated by U.S. companies. That AI is where the Chinese are really good at making things, manufacturing. But on the tech, and if you just think about your iPhone, right? Your iPhone made in China, but all of that intellectual property, all that technology developed here in the U.S. We kind of see a similar scenario playing out where NVIDIA, Intel, Qualcomm, very, very strong in terms of actually the actual tech that's actually the proverbial engine, intellectual engine within the humanoid. It's going to really be dominated by U.S. companies.
That's fascinating. That's really good. And that makes so much sense. The manufacturing more overseas, and but the U.S. still has a lot of leadership in those other spaces, and that's interesting. On a side note, bringing that robot into my office sounds amazing. I will definitely sign up for that when the time comes. That'd be fascinating. Um, Boy, so much. Please just keep going because there's so much interesting stuff you're sharing here.
Yeah. I mean, I think on the robotics side, yeah, it's something that a lot of the applications talk about mining is job these kind of dangerous jobs. Obviously, but one of the areas that I think it's going to be healthcare and senior living. That a lot of people want to obviously stay in their homes, um, and there's a whole host of issues there. How do you know, your parents are taking their drugs? How do you know they haven't fallen? Um, and then who are they? What's their level of communication with people? And so these AI enabled robots, a lot of the early case studies have been enabling people to stay living in their homes if they might be a widower. Um, Obviously, there's a security element to that, but there's the human interaction element that you can actually have a conversation with one of these robots, and that there's a whole host of benefits there. And so the healthcare industry, some of these robots, people say, well, where we've seen a few case studies at the San Jose airport, they have a humanoid robot is almost their information ambassador because it speaks 160 languages. So you can fly in from pretty much anywhere, ask them how do I get from San Jose airport to Palo Alto? Well, it doesn't matter what language you're going to speak, it can speak it. We've seen there's a beta test at Marriott in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where you check in really late at night. It's a humanoid robot, and that robot can get you all straightened away. So we're still in kind of these beta test functions, but that's just the first step, and that's why I really don't think this is quite as far off as it could take 3 to 5 years, but I think you'll start to see this. And again, it's only conceivable with AI, and the AI based on Wi-Fi communication, their ability to connect to Wi-Fi, it allows that cloud-driven AI to process. So it's not just an internal to the robot, it's the ability to connect to a network and tap that. So it's actually coming. We've seen a few. XPeng is a Chinese electric vehicle maker, and they've actually put 2 humanoid robots on their assembly line. And that's a part of a broader trend of a lot. Again, these automakers as well as auto parts makers are kind of saying, these robots, there's a lot of similarities with making cars, and that's why obviously Tesla, Hyundai, I mentioned Xpeng in China, they're making that migration. Schaeffler is a German auto parts maker that's very vocal, very public about how they're migrating. They will become a humanoids robot parts maker, that they see so many similarities, and then that just brings in, who's going to fix your humanoid robot when it breaks, no different than your car. Can you act? What's the business? This idea of robot as a service. Kind of the news. And again, I think what's kind of interesting to me is you really don't see that AI element, for all the talk about AI, it's not a robotic story today, and that's what gets us excited. That it just shows that we're in a very, very early stage.
Yeah, we're in the early stage, but apparently this is probably going to happen a lot faster than we might think. It's hard to even envision. I'm just thinking of examples I've seen. You mentioned some great ones. I discussed in the last podcast, I got a private visit to the Port of Los Angeles, LA, and they have a fully automated loader, that saves two people working there that are paid 400 grand a year. And I guess there's unions, so they'll probably never do that again in the port. But it's fascinating. And I remember this was a few years back, just a check in for a rental car. I think it was in Salt Lake City, where there was nobody there. It was all through the phone, and it was kind of like, whoa. And then the only person was as you drive out of the place, probably just to make sure no one's stealing the car or something, like actual visual. But so much. And you led in with, this is an interesting time. So for investors or people looking to take advantage, with the indexes, how much of this is incorporated or is it not really in there? And some of these may be private, or just curious how that all plays in. Like, to what extent will even you think of the S&P 500 as an index for the U.S. economy or these others, but are they capturing these phenomenon? Because these are giant. Maybe they are through NVIDIA and Intel and things like that. But just curious your thoughts and perspective. And yeah,
I think, yeah, definitely the U.S. market, because of the big NVIDIA and semiconductors. Again, I don't think investors are enthusiastic because of robots. I think just it's the AI. So I think that's maybe something that would give it more legs. In Japan, South Korea, and China, you have a number of these robotics makers or the parts makers, um, have either gone public or in the process. I mentioned Unitree to us is kind of a very big deal because it is the global leader at this juncture, and them going public, we feel like it's in China, so it's a little bit out of sight, out of mind for most of us, but it'll be a very big deal in Asia, because of its scale. It's got, it's making 255 million in revenue, at a 60% gross margin. So this is a profitable company. It's growing like gangbusters. There's a number of its competitors have gone public. A company called Ubatech has gone public. AGBot as a competitor is going to go public. So I think some of this is going to happen outside of the U.S., and I'm probably slightly biased in that sense, but we do see this as a global phenomenon. And there's Rainbow Robotics in South Korea. There's a number of Japanese players. It's going to be a global phenomenon for sure.
Well, that's fascinating. We just obviously saw SpaceX go public here, and some of these are about traditionally private companies. So there's a lot of emphasis on that, but maybe they need that capital. And they talk about maybe even putting some of these data centers into space, and then, but the servicing, right? What if a chip goes out or something? You talked about the servicing of robotics. So fascinating stuff. And, in a bigger picture, it's funny because there's a lot of exciting opportunities you bring up to really make some fundamental changes in lifestyle and help folks. But there's so much sort of, AI or robotic anxiety out there that people fear taking jobs, loss of just normal stuff. I even think of, I grew up studying the Thomas Guide, if you know that, to get around Los Angeles and really, but now, right, everybody just puts it in the phone and it just guides you. And yeah, I'm just curious your thoughts around that, but keep going with all this stuff. It is really fascinating.
Yeah. I think like AI in general, it's going to be regulated. That cities, states, countries are going to have different perspectives on the regulation. I mean, I formerly lived in San Francisco, and moving from New York to San Francisco, there was no cabs in San Francisco. I mean, there was no cabs, and not surprising, that's where Uber was born. Now when you go to San Francisco, there's Waymos, and I would contrast that with London, where your cab driver in London is a very well, they're well compensated, they're educated, and is the city of London going to put its work that London cabbie out of business because Google wants Waymo? I don't think so. Google has a lot of sway in San Francisco, but I think they have zero sway in London. Just as here in New York, you can't take a train from Manhattan to or from any of the major airports. There's three. Why? Because the taxi and limousine commission, has a lot of sway, and so you got to take a train, and then you got to get on a monorail, or you got to get on a bus. I mean, it's you're just like, what, I'm just going to hop in a cab, and that's on purpose. So I think again, cities, states, countries are going to have different perspectives. Are you just going to put a huge swath of people out of business? Well, those people are called voters, and already it's kind of interesting. I mean, in China, they've actually said AI, your job can't be explicitly you can't explicitly lose your job because of artificial intelligence. That you can't just take a job and eliminate it. Now, why is that? Well, China has a lot of people, and you want those people to have jobs. And are you just going to say, all right, no, we're just going to wipe them all out? Definitely not. Definitely not. I mean, so that's where I think you'll see things implemented incrementally over time, and it's not going to be this peel your band-aid or dam breaking, like, oh, guess what? Everyone's out of work. That is no government. Governments always lose. Politicians always, or governments always lose their positioning in economic distress, and so it's in their best interest not to allow that to happen.
Yeah, interesting. I do recall though, like in New York, right? You used to look out and see all yellow, all these cabs, and as I recalled, it was like to get a cab or something, that franchise or that license was like $1 million, and there was
It's true.
wealthy people who had, or entrepreneurs, maybe they had 18 of these things, and all of a sudden that whole business model or wealth is just taken out, so
Yeah.
things
And
change. Yeah.
not just the economic effect, but a lot of people borrowed money to buy that taxi cab, and when the
Yeah.
price fell, there was a really unfortunate human costs, people being over levered, and I think that's again, the city of New York kind of, implemented this, allowed Uber to come in, and that's not the case everywhere in the
Yeah.
world. No different than, are you going to allow autonomous? You might allow autonomous driving, but autonomous trucks, maybe not. So yeah, I think that's where the politicians, out of their own self-preservation, will step in, and then you're seeing that on the AI side already. With that, some of these models, their capabilities are maybe beyond what should be commercially available or just readily available. And even in the U.S., right, they've kind of tapped the brakes on some of these Anthropic releases.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I think that'll happen, really, arguably, not just here in the U.S., but certainly globally.
Yeah, so interesting. So much going on, and our world is evolving. But you've shed some light out. A lot of these things could be really positive. It's coming either way. And then the build out of the infrastructure or whatnot largely supports a lot of this. You mentioned that AI connectivity, and it's just fascinating. I'd love to schedule a follow-up to visit podcast, because you have a lot of thoughts on China, right? You're very deep in that space, and we didn't even get to tackle that. Well, we touched on it, right? But there was a lot of demographic stuff. You mentioned the real estate, this mass migration from into the cities just since the 1980s, and how that's, yeah. We're going to start to kind of wrap up, only in the interest of time and respecting your time, but keep going with some more thoughts that sort of, and I'd love to cue this up for another discussion, because this is it's got me on the edge of my seat here, to be honest. So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, certainly, an element of the roots of the firm are really based in China. Our founder, Jonathan Crane, lived there, and he saw trends that he thought were happening there that would be global, like electric vehicles. That was something that was in China. Because of pollution issues, they really adopted, and the global leader in electric vehicles today is BYD, which started back in 2009. But yeah, we see also there's a lot of misinformation. A lot of the headlines are not necessarily data driven, and we certainly think that in traveling, not just to there but broader Asia, we see a lot of investment opportunities. You have to kind of find them, and at the same time, the U.S. is 63% of global market cap after really an incredible rally going back to the global financial crisis. So we think that investors, great, based on this great U.S. bull market, a lot of investors are very underweight non-U.S. equities. But some of that is almost structural because of the lower weights to technology and growth stocks, and that's kind of part of creating the firm, was kind of giving you that growth exposure for emerging markets in China, where you've had some really good returns. But then, more importantly, giving people this data-driven perspective on what's happening there. Just because I just think a lot of the headlines are hyperbole, they're clickbait. But the two countries are very intertwined economically, and if you think about Tesla or Nvidia, or even companies like Ford. Ford makes a lot of cars in China. ExxonMobil does about 10% of their revenue in China. So we think that's part of, we want to help investors navigate what's happening there, and we do think there's a lot of opportunities. You just got to kind of know where to look.
Okay, and let me ask just another question, maybe a little bit on U.S.-China relationships, and what is it? Clickbait versus, you're mentioning Ford, Exxon has major stakes in there. There was so much manufacturing going on over there, right? And then COVID hit. We realized, maybe it was that wise to have all our supply chains or manufacturing pharmaceuticals over there. Or since, you hear where President Trump didn't want the Chinese to have certain NVIDIA chips, right? State of the art, because they're maybe too good. they need them here and they're in high demand. So I was just curious on what you see. Is it, yeah, because you're in
Yeah,
the
I
space.
think I think COVID showed that there are things that should be made here in the United States, and that can be things our military needs. It could be things that from a healthcare. Obviously, all of these semiconductors are made in Asia. They're really made in Taiwan, and so there's been a push to bring some of that back. And that diversification makes a lot of sense. Now, should everything come back? I mean, I think what's kind of missed in some of this argument is, one, we've really outsourced our pollution to other countries. That our blue skies are partially because a lot of this manufacturing is very dirty. There's a real environmental consequence. If you think about a lot of this mining, which happens down in say Latin America, there is to mine lithium and copper is a very nasty, dirty, dangerous. Same with processing rare earths. There's a reason they do it out in the outback of Australia because no one in their right mind wants to be downwind of that. And so some of the narrative of what can be done here and what can't, I think some of it rolls off the lips. But then there's also and manufacturing is an ecosystem. If you think about cars, it's car parts. And so the US auto industry is actually very reliant on China for a lot of the inputs. And but that ecosystem is something that in China you've seen them, they're very good at it. And that's going to be hard to replicate for everything. And I think that's where there are things that should obviously be made here, and that's going to happen. But it's going to be hard to do it all. Maybe again at the same time with some of these advancements in terms of automation, robotics, 3D printing, that the technology will allow potentially more of that to come back. And that's almost the irony is, you see them. The Chinese are actually some of the leaders in automation, but I do think the the geopolitical between the U.S. and China has improved. That I think there's the corporate interests have kind of held balance, are being heard today. I don't know if that was the case previously. That there's a lot of revenue from U.S. companies generated in China, and so we see a path for things to stabilize and potentially even improve. President Trump, he went to China. Um, it doesn't mean there aren't going to be differing voices, but there's potentially a path for a stabilization, and I think that ultimately is a net positive. Maybe that's my view as a parent. My kids are going to grow up in a very different world than the one I grew up in, and they're China, no different than broader Asia, is not going away.
Yeah, absolutely. It's maybe some of this interdependence is a good thing,
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, because out of necessity. So, so fascinating. We're gonna start to pretty much wrap up here. This is amazing. I'd love to have you back. Out of curiosity, anything you're reading right now that you'd really recommend? I don't want to put you on the spot, or should people just listen to this podcast for all their info?
Well,
I'm joking.
A gentleman named Dan Wang who worked for an Asia-based research firm called GavCal, wrote a book called Breakneck, which talks about it covers a host of topics, but he lived in China. It's a very good read. I write a daily research blog called ChinaLastNight.com where it just our first investor had visited China over really almost 30 years, and he said, I don't believe the narrative in the U.S. media, if it's Bloomberg or Wall Street Journal. And, he was such a big investor with us that he kind of forced me to write him an email about what I thought was what he should know about what was happening in China last night. So I've been writing that for about 10 years now. And it's kind of, again, a data-driven perspective on what's happening there. And I kind of joke and say, not even my mom reads it every day, but, there'll be days where you see a headline and kind of gives us our opportunity to kind of opine on what we think is is there any real meat on the bone there, or is it bark or is it bite? And again, I think the media's changed a lot. Journalists, they're paid on how many people click their article, and if that's your motivation, you get hyperbole, you get exaggeration, apocalyptic, and I think that's hard for particularly in Asia where things are so far. Not everyone's traveling there like we are, but we try to bring that perspective to people here.
That's fantastic. I know just from personal experience, what you hear and what you think, and then when you go visit a place, oftentimes it's really different than the perception you're getting out of just reading the media and whatnot. I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that. That's what we love, that data-driven process. We try and, differentiate, and that's a big part of our process, separating all this click and the news and the noise from the true signals and what's really under the surface and what do people, and following a process, an unemotional, objective, rules-based process. That's what is really the hallmark of me and my practice and what me and my team do. I love the ChinaLastNight.com. I'm going to start checking that out. And listeners, if that was of interest, you maybe check that out. I think that's fascinating. That sounds really, really exciting. Thank you so much for being here. This has been terrific. Yeah.
No, my pleasure. Thank you. And we'll definitely circle back and find out when we're back in the greater Los Angeles area with a robot, of course, with a humanoid robot. We'll get it on the books.
Amazing. Yeah, I'll tell my team and the work colleagues. I'll get excited for that. No pressure there, but that sounds fascinating. And then I could even share back what that experience is like, with the listeners. But great. Any quick closing thoughts? But I think we're pretty much covered a lot. I know you got a whole lot more we could cover, but we'll pick it up. That's super fascinating, Brendan. Thank you.
Really appreciative of the opportunity, and I'm looking forward to a further conversation.
Yeah, me too. Thanks, and for listeners, thank you. I hope you're finding value here. We're just trying to provide good, sort of no-cost public information, but to help folks with investing, with process, with life decisions, what is going on in the world, because we're certainly living through interesting times. There's just and your point about the children inheriting living through a different world, I see it too. It's going to be pretty profound. So thank you for helping us understand that. And for any listeners, please share this. Thank you for listening. Really appreciate it again, Brendan, and make it a great day.
Thank you for listening to the Millionaire Next Door Podcast. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Signature Estate and Investment Advisors or Royal Alliance Associates Incorporated, member FINRA SIPC. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning.
All investing involves risk. Past performance does not indicate future results. Specific products discussed are not suitable for all investors.